Thursday, May 1st, 2025. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Stuga Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, live, and learn. The Durham District School Board recognizes Indigenous rights are distinct. In the exercise of those rights, Indigenous staff and students shall not be subject to actions with the aim or effect of depriving these distinct rights. The Durham District School Board is committed to learning and working environments that center human rights and equity and are safe, welcoming, respectful, equitable, accessible, inclusive, and free from discrimination. We will now move on to our roll call, beginning with regrets. We have regrets from Trustee Donna Edwards and Trustee Michelle Arsenault.
Senator Renee Burrell from Autism Referred.
Ellie Miller, Trustee for HS.
Elizabeth Dank, Member at Large.
Jessica Wells, Member at Large.
Shauna Haley, Grandview Family Advisory Committee.
Olivia Ward, Eastern Hills, Ontario.
Tara Kelly, Durham Down Syndrome Association.
From Jarvis Learning Disability Association, Durham Region.
Jen McLaughlin, Savannah, Africa, Centric Services.
Melissa Cook, Elementary Administration. Lisa.
Lisa Ray, Durham Secondary Middle Figure School, as representative.
I'm Cody Jall, I'm the Head of Student Success, Centers for Success Facilitator at DDSB.
My name is Monique Mueller, I'm the System Lead for Student Success.
Connor Jenkinson, System Lead Principal of Inclusive Student Services.
Michelle Property, Principal, Inclusive Student Services.
Lisa is Recording Secretary for SEAC. I'm Andrew McCauley, Superintendent of Inclusive Student Services.
I'm Eva Kyriakis, Association for Bright Children and CF Chair. Okay, moving on with the approval of the agenda. Before we have a motion to approve the agenda, I would like to move the business arising from the minutes at number 10 to number 8, just right after the staff report, just to ensure that we have quorum throughout sort of that kind of business. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or concerns with that? Okay, can I get a motion then to pass the agenda as modified? Carol, all in favor? DeRoe, seconder, all in favor? Motion passed. Okay, approval of the minutes from the April 3rd meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from last month's meeting? Are there any questions or concerns with those minutes? Okay, can we get a motion to pass? Kara, seconds? Thank you, super. Elizabeth, all in favor? Thanks. All right, motion passed. Staff report, we'll begin with the impact of the ISF update report.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Thank you.
So this evening, what we've done, knowing the complexity of topics and just this time of year with some brilliant student joy and some program updates, and so that our gallery also has access to the information being shared. We've put the information into PowerPoint this evening, and we are going to co-share it. So introducing, you have met Fatima Beauregard, who is our Senior Manager and Clinical Lead for Speech Language. And so we start the department report this evening with the ISS Impact Update for May, which has a focus on speech language services. Fatima, over to you.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be here to present this impact statement today on speech and language services at the board. It's great because actually today's May 1st, which is the kickoff to Speech and Hearing Month in Canada. So it's a great time to raise awareness about communication health and the work that SLPs do every day to support students with language, communication, and literacy needs in schools. This impact statement highlights the services that we provide who we support and how to access our services. And we know that communication skills are really just so important for the academic success, social participation, and well-being of all of our students, and felt that we wanted to highlight the variety of ways that we support students across the system. I think you've all got copies of it or access to it, so you can see a few of the ways that we do through assessments, collaboration, ongoing training, workshops, and ongoing community connections. And I just wanted to say, as a group, our DDSB SLPs are a highly trained and caring group of individuals that are really dedicated and committed to providing culturally responsive, inclusive, and evidence-informed services to our students at DDSB.
Thanks, Matt. And again, always encouragement is that the impact updates are written, they're public facing on the board's website. But it is always with the intention, invitation, and request for sharing with your associations, because it's really the flow through of intention of program services through to the impact for kids, which ultimately is most important. On screen, you will see a recent session from April 14th, where the transition coordinators partnered with Community Living Ontario for Ready, Willing, and Able. So RWA is an employment readiness training program, and they were in meeting with students from the Transition to Work program on their skills and also how that flows over to inclusive workplaces, supporting employment, meaningful and paid employment for our students 18 to 21. So a really powerful workshop. So on the right-hand side, you see the individuals from Community Living. Justin and Christine are in the middle. Ashley is on the far left. And then on the right-hand side, you see Brayden and Sade, and the three transition coordinators, Ashley, Brayden, and Sade, work with Michelle, supporting those 18 to 21 pathways for our kids.
And 1 week ago, we had an inclusive skills festival here at the Ed Center. So we had a lot of students come in from across the DDSB from some of our PLP elementary programs and be able, PLP being our practical learning programs, and be able to come in and participate in inclusive baking. There were some amazing culinary skills that were showed. We had some rolling sandwiches. We had some cupcakes that were made. We had pancakes that were made. There was cupcake decorating, and there was a lot of we also had students who participated in coding as well as Zen gardening. So they made a sand garden that they were able to take with them as well. We did some of those life skills such as place setting and how to do some of those considerations around that. So a lot of our skills, this began actually a couple of months ago, where there was more work at trying to figure out what are some of those things that would be high interest, such as things like we actually also had building construction skills with the Make Do kits. So those are cardboard with fasteners and things, and as well as photography. So those are some things that we've heard from across the system. This was our first attempt at this, and we had lots of schools show up and lots of schools participate within this, and the whole Ed Center was taken over with this huge, massive amount of energy, and we saw lots of students really engage in the programming. But thank you in partnership as well with the Nice department, as well as teaching and learning, as well as with Innovative Ed. Everybody, all the departments pulled in and really made sure this was a special day. We look to continue this across. This was our first try, so we kept it, although we said we had lots, we did keep it fairly tight in terms of numbers, because we also were bringing in, we want to make sure it's going to be successful. To support our students, we also had some breakout sessions and some breakout areas, as in our boardroom, which we found out can be an amazing spot to sing as we can go through. Our students found the mics. That it was amazing. And then we also had, but it was also designed to be kind of that active, wide open space to be able to just kind of do some of that regulation. And then we also have thank you to our partner Bridges Canada, who provided a multimodal space and more of a sensory space as well. So again, a very successful day, and we'll be back. We'll be back.
And in credit to the integration, a smaller version was, and more specific version, was also run in our day treatment main base. So we've talked about growth as our educational community partnership programs or day treatments for students. And so the team, again, between student success, inclusive student services, and innovative ed, went out and ran a smaller day around gardening and cooking and high skills majors programs, and mimicking that inclusive skills for our students that are accessing through day treatment pathways. So really looking at how do we take all programs in the district and make sure that there is accessibility, inclusion, and access for all students. So a really powerful day. We wanted to make sure that it didn't get missed this evening, that the SEAC parent caregiver survey, so the survey that the content of which you approved and the dates of which you approved is about to launch, with today being May. The survey runs from May 12th to May 6th. And so following the success of the survey in 2023 and the related communication plan, we're following that exact plan. And so on Tuesday, all families with IPRCs or IUPs in place or students of age will receive a direct email saying that the survey is coming. And then on May 12th, they will receive the survey launch, inclusive of the access direct to the survey, as well as the availability of translated versions for access. Last year, we found it really, or 2 years ago when we ran it, really helpful to send an access link at the midpoint, acknowledging families that had responded to the survey, and again, inviting those that have not yet had opportunity to do so. And then we'll monitor that, and if we need to send another message early June, we will. It's just trying to balance giving parents and caregivers enough information without flooding inboxes for individuals that are very busy in support of their kids. So just that's coming, and that it closes after the June meeting, so the preliminary results and analysis will come forward at the September SEAC meeting and enable the committee to set action plan for 25-26, similar to how we did that in 2023, took the results and then actioned it back into resources for families. So we're happy to circulate after SEAC as well. The messages are written and are with our communications team, but happy to circulate those messages to the committee. So that you know what's going out to families, recognizing that not all committee members would be receiving that as a parent or caregiver in the district. We also, in collaboration with our board of trustees, want to recognize a learning session that took place a couple of weeks ago. So senior leaders from facilities, IT, our leaders in ISS, including Fatima, Connor, Michelle, and our psych services, as well as trustees and the entire senior team. We're in a learning session with Dr. Jillian Perkett around ableism in education, inclusion in education, myths and myth busting around disability and inclusion. So a really good conversation facilitated over a couple hours. We did host the session in one of our schools. Westmead Heights is in Ajax and supports students both in regular class placement as well as developmental programs and structured learning classes. And before the session, we were able to, with the administrator and the special education resource teacher, go into some of those spaces to see the evidence of strategies in motion for kids. And so I didn't know, Kelly, if you wanted us to pause for a minute, if you had reflections from the evening.
I just say that trustees were also in attendance, and it was really great. We talked about ableism in education, and it was an excellent training session to support special needs and inclusion.
Thank you so much. At this time, so it is May, and with appreciation for the subcommittee that put together, and then Tara and Eva supporting the deputation to education finance. The deputation from SEAC did go forward, as we have not yet received the release of core education funding from the Ministry of Education. The upcoming education finance meeting for May 12th has been postponed. Because we do need the details of funding revenue into the district in order to move the next steps in process and planning. For those new to the table, the Education Act includes a requirement that boards pass a balanced budget by July 1st. And so we are looking forward to the release of core education funding, of which special education funding is a key component of, so that together with the Board of Trustees, senior team and the Board of Trustees can move forward in that budget process. And we do not yet know if that will impact the second deputation date or not. It'll just be dependent on release of funding. Once core education funding is released, we will send an email out to SEAC. So I imagine it will be in the news, but we will send an email direct to you with the links to the document. In that though, we know that for students with special education needs, accommodation needs, planning takes quite a while, both for families, for students, and for our school teams. And so in advance of the release of the budget, we have moved a few commitments for 2025, 2026. And so inclusive of that, SEAC has been made aware of the last few years. We have run therapeutic recreation in partnership with the Durham Catholic District School Board, as well as the Ability Center. We ran that through a summer project. So the ministry has for many years provided funding for summer program for students with special education needs. We take a portion of that funding to push into the partnership to run for students who access life skills programs during the day, during the school year, to access programming at the center and in community. We knew that if we got too far out of April without being able to make that funding commitment, the program would not be able to be lifted off the ground. One, in terms of ability center planning, and two, mainly families plans for the summer. Again, these are students and youth, adolescents that require 24-hour care. And so we have, with gratitude to the senior team and moving some money if we need to, we have made the commitment of confirmation of $35,000 from the Durham District School Board and the funding of 2 educational assistants for the summer in order to ensure that the planning at the Ability Center could continue. And so we look forward in the next few weeks releasing registration information to families. And then hopefully the grant comes through and everything goes back where it was. But that was really important to us. As a growth enrollment district, the roles that Michelle and Connor are in are really, really important in supporting families, consistency across the district. They directly lead teams such as the facilitators, teachers of blind, low vision, teachers of deaf, hard of hearing. What is largely unknown in the system is that in many cases, Connor and Michelle are leading as many staff members as some of our school principals, and then have half the schools in the system each in terms of direct support. So again, with support of the senior team, there has been a 3rd district principal mobilized for September in the department. So the department leadership team goes to a superintendent, senior managers for psychological services, speech language, and social work, as well as 3 system leads who will split the portfolio of support to the district. Based on new student enrollment, again, we know we have a PPM that says 1-to-1, where students' primary language is ASL. And so over the last month, we have welcomed 2 new students to the district who ASL is their first language. And so we have also mobilized hiring of 2 additional ASL interpreters in service of students in the district. And you will see that reflected. I'll just finish this slide and I'll come back. See that reflected when you see the staffing section of the special education plan and the related board budget. As well, we know as a growth enrollment district, our student needs are growing as our population grows. We know in September that we are opening 2 brand new elementary schools. And so our special education resource full-time allocation is a budgeted number, and then we divide and we allocate those out to schools. So opening 2 new schools without increasing the number of certs would mean a decrease to some of our other schools. And so again, with support of senior team in our staffing, because again, our timelines, we are well into the staffing rounds for September already. We mobilized an additional 2 elementary certs. A portion of that cert time, so that's 2 full-time equivalents. A portion has gone to each of the new schools. And then the remaining portion has gone to the schools with the greatest impact or enrollment changes in regards to students. Both the schools are not opening with full-time certs based on the same model of distribution for all our other schools in the system. And then in a moment, I'll just take a question from Sienna and Shauna. We do have changes to special education classes on the next screen, which net out an increase to the number of seats and roster spaces available to students. I'll pass over because we're going to switch a slide and then I miss your question.
Thank you. My question kind of touches on what you just said, and then also back to the page about the SLP
Oh, okay, great.
stuff. so you were talking about the ASL instructors?
Interpreters,
Interpreters?
correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, I guess, what the policy is for students who, only use ASL but don't have a designation as deaf or hard of hearing. Because I have some families telling me that their child only communicates with ASL, they're autistic, but they aren't receiving any support for ASL.
So my understanding, or unless you want to take it, okay, I can start, go ahead. Is right now, in terms of multimodal communicators, which are families with students with autism, may use some gesturing or language-based to support, would fall under other supports in the district. In terms of qualified ASL interpreters, it is an allocation for those that ASL, as a member of the deaf hard of hearing community, ASL is their primary first language.
Yes, and what typically happens is when a student comes in, there would be a referral to our deaf hard of hearing services. And then there would be an assessment. Sometimes students are coming in with an assessment, let's say from W. Ross. So dependent, but it is for students that their L1 is ASL.
Okay, so just tying that back then to the page about the speech language pathologists, how are they supporting staff right now with students who are not speaking?
Absolutely. So I want to answer your question and I want to be conscientious of agenda. So if it's okay with you, just prior to you joining SEAC, Fatima, who you heard from the voice from, as well as our AAC lead within the speech team, came and did a full presentation to the table on exactly your question. So if it's okay with you, and at the will of the chair, what I will do is go back in, because the sessions are recorded, what I can do is catch that link and send you the exact timing of that presentation. And then if there's any further questions, Fatima will rejoin us in our June meeting and be able to answer those too, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Amanda and Fatima, they came and brought low tech, high tech, lots of different options, and SEAC had a very robust discussion about the supports, which was amazing in terms of the questions and wonderings. And so I think many of your questions would be answered in that, and if they're not, then we'll make sure they are. Okay, is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So Lisa's just writing that down as a follow-up for us to. So within, as you see at the bottom, there is, so every year, as a district, we make a nominal number of adjustments to the number of each special education placement class and the location. So as a staff, based on students that are accessing programs, based on about a 3 to 5 year trajectory, we move some of the classes around or will change the context of the classes responsive to students. So what you see is the summary of changes both at the elementary and secondary level that are baked into the staffing plans and the transition plans for schools. So where you see 3 closures of school support programs, we know that UDL has increased. The school support program is largely literacy, numeracy, and learning skills, executive functioning. And so we do have the closure of 3. Again, we want to make sure that where students are accessing, they have robust access to a classroom community as well. So moving away from those in that space, 2 additional developmental program classes for our students who need that wraparound medical support and care, the opening of 2 practical learning program spaces, life skills, functional literacy and numeracy, and the opening of an elementary structured learning class for students with complex needs related to autism and communication and practice. At secondary, you're going to see a bit of what may appear as an anomaly in the list where you see a close and an open of the same program type. We'll explain that. So again, at the secondary level, as students at the senior level, so grade 11 and 12, have excellent course options fitting their personal pathways. The course selection is doing what school support kind of used to do, but in a more inclusive way. And you'll hear Kaldita and Monique speak about 30 credits my way, and I think you'll see a congruence there. You see a close of a transition door and an opening of one. So for us, from a collective agreement perspective, a move is when the majority of the students who are currently accessing in one school year would be moving with the class. A close and an open is when students are graduating or transitioning, and it is a new set of students. The close and open are around staffing implications where we have moves. Educators, teachers, and EAs are able to choose whether they move with the class or not. And where we have a close or an open, it's within the two staffings of those schools. So that decision is maintaining of the number of transition to work seats or spots. But the close and the open is due to the rosters. Graduation, students leaving because they have paid employment, and the students coming into the program being in another family of schools, and so locating that class within there. And then the relocations, as I said, are based on access over about the next 3 to 5 years. So we know, for example, in Ajax, one of our structured learning classes located at the north end of the municipality. The kids who are accessing over the next 3 to 5 years are in the south. And so the class is moving to make sure that their transportation isn't as far, they're closer to home, and they're more likely to be with the kids from their home community. So again, you see that commitment to community-based learning access echoed throughout all of the planning for kids. And then again, the same thing with the 2 practical learning classes, a bit of a shift in a couple of municipalities based on the students and where they live and what is their home high school. We've actually moved the class from the kids that are graduating out of the program into the school for the kids who are accessing within the next 3 to 5. Not 100% of the list always comes from a school, but in general, we've hit it with these ones. Again, trying to get kids what they need within their home school. And so that's the summary of our changes that are built in. So again, you see an increase to direct one-to-one for those that have ASL language access needs. You see an increase to the leadership support for inclusive schools for our families. And then you see an amendment and addition of special education spaces. What we will need to watch as a district is these things all will need to be paid for within a balanced budget. And so this has come with the support of the entire senior team to make the choices we need to make in order to fund these things. And then if the budget comes through and there's an increase, then we start looking, there is a secondary wish list underneath this, such as clinical supports behind that. So we just wanted to make that transparent as it'll go into the budget process. And over to you, my friend Karen.
So as mentioned previously at SEAC, the Durham District School Board is engaging in an action research project to better understand the experience and programming needs of students who are deaf and hard of hearing. Lead researchers and DDSB partners, led by Dr. Weber. She's a Canada Research Chair Council in Deaf Education from the University of Alberta. And Dr. Joanna Cannon, who is from the University of British Columbia, will be engaging in focus groups and interviews with staff and families May 20th to 23rd. So they are coming for a visit. The second phase will include students in the fall, and the results of the shared survey, as well as the focus groups and interviews, will be shared with SEAC in the fall. And I next bring what I like to refer to as icing and sprinkles. This is one of our favorite days. We're very happy to say that we have found a space. So the 2025 Abilities Track and Field Meet will take place over 2 days instead of 1 this year. So Thursday, May 22nd will be secondary students, and Friday, May 23rd will be elementary. And we are actually taking over Iroquois Park and Sports Complex, as well as the Ability Center track. And it will be between the times of around 10:30 till about 1:30, 1:45. So please, if you really want to experience ultimate joy, icing and sprinkles, as I like to refer to it, please put it on your calendar. Let Lisa know, and we would happy to see you there. It's an amazing, amazing event.
And then our last celebration, just we'll pause and then take any questions and then go and skip it. You will see a program guide from an event that took place earlier this week. So the Student Recognition Awards recognize 3 students from each of our secondary and continuing ed programs for their brilliance, excellence, and contribution. And so information has been given permission to be publicly shared. And so we share these with you tonight. It is a magical night. Look at our friends that were there as students cross the stage for being recognized absolutely for their brilliance, perseverance and leadership within their school communities, including all of our alternate education programs. So we share that with you and invite you to take that home and just read about some other joy and success of secondary students. And then we'll pause for a second if there's any
We'll
questions.
pause and take any questions on the staff report as it stands right now. No? I have a comment to make. So, you know, Tara and I were discussing after we did the budget presentation, which actually Tara really did the budget presentation. Did a fantastic job. As usual. I was just in there really as more
Wonderful people.
but we were discussing it, like, there was a time where we would get the technical paper, the board would get the technical paper in time to prepare a draft budget, and that draft budget would be provided to SEAC, so we could actually consult on the budget. That has not happened since 2018. We have not gotten the budget on time in order for us to make any real meaningful consultation or input on the budget. And of course, you know, as far as I'm aware, the actual provincial budget hasn't even, it is about to go to the legislature, so it hasn't even actually gone to the legislature yet. So, you know, they're well behind this time. And I don't know, I think it's something whether, you know, we advocate for a lot of things. I wonder if partly what we should be advocating for is for them to get on top of getting that back to the board at a reasonable time, so that when it comes to budget consultation time, SEAC can actually consult on a budget and not, you know, keep this in mind and, you know what I mean, to actually see the numbers and make meaningful consultation, so providing consultation. It's up to the will of the group. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm happy to draft something up if the group wants something like that or wants to have a discussion about it, but Tara, go ahead.
Speaking as someone who does a lot of the budget application and work over the years, I very much appreciate the, let's get our collective stuff together, shall we, government, so that we actually have time to get through. It's not just us to report on it, but the finance committee itself. This is not like $30 that we're talking about. This is several hundred millions of dollars that we're talking about, and our kids that we're talking about. It would be nice to give them as much time to figure out the best way to spend the money that we've got, and then for us to have a fulsome, robust discussion about it and get feedback. I would love to be able to have feedback from community members and things, and just folks sitting around the table, like we're here to represent our community, and we get no time collect that feedback. So we're kind of going, this is what has typically been our concerns, and that's it. Like, we don't actually get actual feedback. That's my
Since 2018.
Yeah, we write very little, and then the transparency has gone down as well. We used to get the technical paper with the stuff and we don't get the math anymore. It's secret now, and that doesn't really sit very well.
Well, and when you're looking at the regulation, right, the SEAC regulation, I mean, it doesn't talk about being provided with the opportunity to consult on the budget. Well, boards can't provide us, you know, in fairness to the board, they can't provide us with the opportunity to consult properly, meaningful consultation, if we don't have the document to consult on, right? And it's not the fault of the board because you can't really make budget and you don't have a technical thing, but it is a concern. So yeah, I don't know, does anybody have anything else they wanna? So it's whether or not somebody wants to make a motion for us to write a letter. Okay, Sarah, since we're done, any seconders? Rowan Jarvis, all in favor? Okay, motion passed. We'll write a letter. I'll write the letter. I'll try and get it out in draft to you guys. Yeah, Rob, is that?
One question regarding it. Was there a reason why we stopped getting it? Like, is that something we have to address, or did it just sit here when you?
is timing. The ministry's technical paper, which is what the boards use to determine the budget, like the funding, where the, you know, sort of sets out the funding and the envelopes and stuff, so they know what they're working with to create the budget. If they don't have that, they can't create budget. They can't create a draft budget in time because it has to be approved sort of before the end of the year, right? Yeah. Okay.
So typically, I just want to clarify that when the technical paper, so when the ministry releases the core education funding, which is the overall umbrella, and all of the details, it comes usually with a phenomenal family-facing kind of summary, couple pages, and then it comes with a pretty substantive book that is the technical paper of the nuances of table amounts, calculations, and then board allocated amounts. So typically what we've done in Durham is as soon as the technical paper is released and the supplemental resources, we put all of the links from the ministry in an email and circulate it to SEAC. So again, you don't have to go looking for it as staff. We flag it pretty quick and start diving in. Many of you have met Jen Machen and the team. And so as soon as we have the links and the ministry publishes to districts and publicly at the same time, but we don't want you to have to go finding it, so we send it to SEAC. The meaningful consultation with SEAC, and again, to draft budgets for districts are public-facing documents. So our trustees, and I know Kelly's here is represented tonight, the other two are at downtown working with Public School Board and Labor. The draft budgets are all public facing as well, and are not in camera. Those are for just public discussion and public sort through. So the information's there. What it is it's the timing with SEACs being monthly. When we do not receive funding until May, and a past budget has to go forward by July 1st or after the end of June 30th, the timing of being able to provide where the calendar allows for SEACs to meet in the meantime for that robust discussion gets quite tight. And so I think that's where Eva's positioning the advocacy for, and election years can be different because of when Parliament's recalled. But the earlier we have information, the better able we are to do consultation and planning. So we start planning the expenditures back in January for the next school year, but they all are draft. We have to meet labor commitments. As I said, there are processes and commitments to children, especially children and adolescents that require significant transition plans. So there are commitments that we make in front of, but at a risk of. So as soon as it's public, you have it, but it's just sometimes we don't have a meeting in time. We might be in a better shape this year with SEAC moving to the first week of the month. When we were third week, if the budget was released beginning of June and SEAC didn't meet till the third week, the motion of the budget was already in place, again, to hit that end of the month. So hopefully we'll be in a position where June can have a fairly significant discussion around the budget and the projections.
Pretty sure this is a question for our staff, Andrew. So I know last year we had finance training for the different envelopes and the different funds that would be coming back. And that was helpful in understanding what changes were coming in, what was enveloped and what was in. So would there be a time enough for another, or reference at least a package that will allow for us to break down those?
Fair. So I'll make the same offer. Jen came 2 months ago and did an overview of the budget and the different packages. And so what we'll do is we'll go back and get that video link and circulate it to SEAC as well, as Jen's PowerPoint, because she had gone through the different packages, the 4 elements of the special education fund. And then if there's any further questions, happy to create an FAQ for SEAC and get you the information you need.
Awesome. Any other questions? In terms of that? No? Okay, so we're gonna move on then to the number 8, business rising from the minutes. And for me, just so you know, we blocked that from number 10 to number 8. And at this time, because this affects my association, I'm gonna hand the chairing over to Tara. I'll take it back when we're through this one.
No, we can't have that.
Okay. Okay.
You need it? No, just kidding. Okay, so there was conversations on rather lengthy, robust conversations over the last little bit, about our gifted program and placement. So I think this was sort of the conversation that Andrea, you and Michelle were going to have sort of, and bringing forward some information, shall we, to SEAC about that, so.
So is that all right? We're gonna see some information and, for especially the table.
Yes, please.
I just want to note appreciation for Monique and Kuldeep, in the adjustment of the agenda before your presentation, so thank you. So I'm just gonna set a little bit of a foundation, in terms of the gifted placement program and supports for students, and Michelle's tagging in, on our process reviews this year. So we've tried to design it in response to the questions around the table, and those that have come in through emails. So when we look at consultation on the overall inclusive student services special education plan, so we do revise it annually with consultation at this table. And the plan is publicly posted on the board's website, including an invitation for feedback at any time from the community. And so we just positioned tonight that there's two key standards. So again, there's a regulation that sets kind of the chapters of the special education plan. Sorry, teacher talk. So the chapters, and so two of the standards that are really important in terms of how kids access programs and services. One is we would consider the entire document important, but this is specific to this conversation. So standard 2 is the board's general model for special education. And in the Durham plan over the last few years, and again, the language that was brought was consistent with the plan over the last 2 years, highlighting inclusive education, as well as standard 9 that deals specifically with special education placements. Again, we are a board of many paths to success, honoring both regular class through to intensive support programs. That was part of the department report in February with invitation for consultation on both of those sections, invited by SEAC. And we just draw particular attention to this year's plan, page 6. There is an entire section entitled Inclusive Education, which echoes the importance of regular class placement for students as the primary option. And our data reflects as meeting the majority of students' special education needs. Out of the, sorry, are you okay? That's okay. And we referenced the SEAC parent caregiver survey earlier this evening from 2023, a biannual survey for parents and caregivers. And so out of the survey in 2023, there was feedback around communication and clarity and the IPRC process. And so those that were at the table earlier this fall may remember that we had made the commitment to not only update the DDSB parent guardian guide to IPRC, but also create a supplemental resource that provided a little bit of information. You go to the next one? When you can. Supplemental information, as well as so that the certs could use that, our schools could use it, and our families could use it. And it is that PowerPoint that we looked at over a couple months as SEAC. SEAC gave incredible feedback on the content of that PowerPoint. And so we're just going to share a couple slides from that, that also highlight the language again that was confirmed and consulted around this table. And so the next few slides, and the
this resource has been designed as a supplemental to the DDSB. A strong emphasis is placed
on IPRCs with special education strengths and needs.
You just turn it off. Yeah. So on the board's website, where we have the DDSB Parent Guardian Guide to IPRC, there's a link to that PDF. And then this is a live link to the presentation underneath. And as you can hear, there is an attached audio file to that. And if at the will of SEAC, we would circulate these slides, and those are live links in the document. And so in that, you can see that echoing the special education plan through to the IPRC document, through to the supplemental document, again, all around this table in development, is that the prioritization is given through regular class programming and accommodations in students' homeschool environments where that is feasible and makes sense to do so. And then I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Sure, thanks, Andrea. Okay, so according to the Ministry of Education, we do have 5 placement options, with regular class within direct support being the most inclusive. The DDSB regular class with resource assistance and regular class with withdrawal assistance, as mentioned before at SEAC, is really utilized for students that are supported through our blind and low vision and deaf and hard of hearing itinerant teachers. Regular class with indirect support, as mentioned, is the most inclusive. That involves individualized accommodations based upon the foundations of universal design for learning, differentiation, tools and resources to address individual learning needs, leveraging technology and programming supports such as CERT or curriculum leads for inclusive student services at secondary, and of course our ISS or integrated services team members. Placement decisions prioritize inclusion and are guided by students' unique strengths, interests, and needs. Some students require a higher level of support, so more intensive intervention and specialized services in order to meet the success. For those students, parents, guardians may be offered an opportunity to explore special education class placement for their child. And the DDSB, as Andrea has mentioned, we offer a range of class types to meet students' interests, strengths, and needs. As research in special education continues to evolve, the DDSB, aligned with other school boards, is reviewing how best to support students with exceptionalities. The district's approach to special education placement is guided by the principle that wherever possible, students' learning and well-being needs are best met in regular class environments within their home communities. This is consistent, as mentioned prior, with the Education Act and the Ontario Human Rights Commission policy on accessible education. Formal identification as a student with special education exceptionalities entitles the student to accommodation support programming to their potential. The nature of an accommodation is not an assumption of a special education class. We acknowledge that our current practices related to special education, gifted, are inconsistent with our principles and commitments of inclusion as outlined in the DDSB Special Education Plan. For 2025-2026, gifted screening process random selection, which has been embedded within communication, was utilized. This is not a change in program. It's not a change to the special education placement gifted. The random selection process does not deprive students of programming. Programming is delivered through the board's commitment in inclusion in regular class with indirect support. This is our pathway to correcting incongruency and an anomaly which has overstreamed students who have an intellectual disability giftedness into placement programs, removing them from their homeschool community. Concurrently, we are examining programming supports to create community connection for our students. This includes, as mentioned, support of a gifted facilitator and definitely amplifying board-wide workshops and competitions for students identified as gifted.
Any comments or questions? Eva.
Yes, okay. First off, you referred to giftedness as an intellectual disability because you're referring to the Human Rights Code. The Human Rights Commission's policy on special education. In that policy paper, it actually states child who's gifted and thereby may be designated as an exceptional student under the Education Act and require a special education program is not likely regarded as having a disability under the code. So the policy paper on special education is actually not directed at gifted learners. It's directed at students with with disabilities. I would also point out on the ministry's website, under the exceptionalities, under intellect, it does not list disability beside the gifted designation as it does under the other two. So it's not considered a disability, it's considered an exceptionality that needs accommodation. There's a number of myths around gifted kids and gifted educations. Some of the myths are that gifted kids don't need help, they can find on their own, which is not true. We know that, and any teachers who teach within the gifted program will tell you that, or even teachers that don't, they often become disengaged. They can become behavior issues within the classroom because they are bored, they're frustrated, they tend to have difficulty with the peers. Not, and I will state, this is not all gifted kids. This is a trend we find though, and that many of the kids will display over time. They often get frustrated with peers of their same age group as they don't move along as quickly in things. They end up often being ostracized as a result of that. So, you know, when we talk about that as consultation, there wasn't discussion around the gifted program and changes to that around this table. There was no talk at the time about capping or anything else, which is not really consultation. It's a change in the delivery of the program, which is something that SEAC should be consulted on at any given time. We have had wait lists before simply when parents haven't returned the forms in time in order to allow for parents are told, you know, give some time to think about it, but not a lot, right? And if there's been a case where there's not enough to open another class, they don't. And as you know, we stated last month, the funding for the actual gifted classrooms doesn't come out of special education. It comes out of core education funding, just like any other classroom. They're capped at 25, which is 0.5 above the class average cap. So, and you know, we're talking about growing numbers. Some of the things that were said to me that were some of the reasons behind it was that the numbers were growing. I attended the tour at HL and was told there's 2 grade 4-5 split classes, right? And moving into the ones that were moving in from last year. When my older child went into that program initially, actually both my kids went in, there were 2 full grade 4 classes. And the 2 full classes pretty much the right way through. So we're not even back to where those numbers were prior to sort of the brief time when we were trying to use the insight testing. We're not even back up to those numbers. This board is growing as a district, right? So if you get, 2,000 or 3,000 more kids in, you're going to get the 2% that come in along with those kids as well as being gifted. So those things don't sort of line up with that. The other thing that I'm concerned about is the random selection, because it doesn't look at need. It doesn't look at the individual need. You've got kids who may be just fine remaining in their mainstream class. They may just be fine. But you have other kids that socially and emotionally absolutely need that change, and they're not being given true choice. When it's a random selection, it's not true choice. So those are some big concerns that I have with that. We don't have French immersion. We haven't had French immersion. That's still a choice. So I'm not understanding particularly why we're capping a class that's like a special education class that's not funded out of, it's not like it's costing the board money from special education to run that program the way it has been running successfully for a number of years. So those are some of the concerns I have around sort of the decision making, because it doesn't seem to, the choice to cap and do a random selection doesn't address some of the issues that were raised in around inclusion and it doesn't actually give parents true choice. Like the IPRC isn't a decision, it's just, oh yeah, here you go. Yeah, you were selected or you weren't. Some of the other concerns was even around the communication of that, because parents, I ended up talking to that night, were very concerned about the idea that they were only going to get a 1-year placement. And I know IPRCs are done every year, but the way that was communicated in the email made it sound like they were being put back into random selection for next year. And that was I think a number of trustees received concerns around that, emails and concerns around that as well. So those things sort of didn't roll out well. And the other thing is, because of the myths around gifted learners and the supports that they need, there's very little opportunity or time when you're talking a teacher in a mainstream class, especially if we're talking them in a split class, where those kids who are gifted, where you have maybe one or two, are going to get that extra support and attention when you have kids in that same classroom who are struggling with the curriculum. The focus is not going to be on the kid who's above the curriculum or, has grasped it the first time and is now getting upset and frustrated because they're being asked to do the same math worksheets essentially with different questions for the next 2 weeks. So there's no real plan put in place. There's not a plan to put in place to have, sort of gifted withdrawal for those students. There's nothing set up that we can concretely see and even comment on if the movement is to keep it integrated in a regular class placement. What is that plan? Like, we can't, it's very hard for me to accept the idea of trust us, it'll be okay, with no plan to look at or to see or comment. And from what I've experienced, talking to different parents who've made that decision initially, is it hasn't worked out. It hasn't worked out that way. So, I'm not sure why the capping of the classes is the answer to that, or the random selection, but I feel that as though the choice has been removed from parents, true choice. And that a child who maybe very much needs that placement won't get it because they weren't chosen, whereas a child who may have been okay would. So I just feel it's been very arbitrary. Any other comments?
Kelly?
Just wanted to touch base with the reflections that came from our last standing committee meeting regarding the questions that came up around gifted. I did hear from the staff, they brought up the universal design. For me, what I'm missing, or what it sounds like I think needs to be explored, I understand that there were different understandings at different points of entry, but we're on the same page of supports and the need to make sure that we're inclusive and our students are equally getting the individual supports. But what I wanted to know was a little bit more about the benefits and talk about the in-class supports and the universal design and having the in-class in terms of the kids or students who have, I guess, the dual, what we call two exceptional. So they're also gifted, but they have the needs for their other support needs, whether it's different challenges in their learning development or maybe social, emotional learning skills. So what I want to understand is when we talk about the change or what has been suggested is how do we know about, how do we understand the benefits and how do we ensure to our parents that, yes, we will be provided with the same supports in that in-classroom placements. I think that's where I'm wanting to get a little bit more understanding. I said so much, I can summarize. So is that what you're
Great.
yourself?
Do you want to start again? So thank you, because I think at the core of all of the communications, both around this table and from parents and caregivers, is a deep love for kids. And wanting really great things for kids and wanting really amazing pathway options, a very inclusive experience supporting both their well-being and their learning. And I think that's at the core of every conversation for every family, no matter the exceptionality for the child, including families of children whose exceptionality and accommodation needs include gifted. When we look at, again, and so I'm gonna kind of jump and then tell me if I've missed something. When we look at the commitments of our teaching and learning teams, our administrators, it really is a system that has said, sending a child elsewhere separate and different with an automaticity that says your needs cannot be met in your home school is a form of streaming that does not exist for any other exceptionality except for gifted. So when we look at numbers, what we would not say is if a student with, and I don't wanna position kids against other kids, that's not what we're about. But if we were to say that all students with an exceptionality of, each of you can come, you're in different associations and different, so imagine if for children and families supported through your association, we said the automaticity is, as soon as you have an exceptionality, the assumption should be, you need to go somewhere else to have your needs met. We would be having conversations at SEAC that said that that's an exclusionary practice. So enabling a practice as a district that says, go somewhere separate and different, first in primary, rather than looking at through the power of the IEP as a legal commitment and document to accommodation and positioning choice. Again, a capping of the class at this time is not a reduction. You saw our numbers for other classes. We maneuver to meet students' needs. But if we were streaming, hyper streaming any other exceptionality out of their home schools, I would imagine this table to be in rightful uproar. Because we need to look at how do we meet from an inclusive public education system. And so our model sits on the yes and of looking. Is a random selection the best option? Probably not. Are we looking at that as a senior team and department? Absolutely. But what we needed to do in any change in a large system is to stop an automaticity that has a separation or streaming aspect to it with differential supports. The question around personalized attention comes in the accountability of, an individual education plan. We know and recognize as administrators, and we have other colleagues who lead schools around the table. Today was Melissa's first day as a principal. And so leading programs, that individual education plan needs to have meaningful goals, key accountabilities, be designed with student voice and choice, be in connection with families. And so that is the primary starting point. I do not position the gifted program similarly to French immersion. French immersion is a program. The gifted special education classes are a special education placement. The two are not synonymous with each other. One is an accommodation and there's special education, and the other is, as you said, a program. So I don't think the comparative of scaling is a fair one. When we look at funding, yes, from a teacher education perspective, the teacher cost is the same as a mainstream regular classroom, because you are correct. The EdAct sets gifted for a class that is for students who are primarily gifted, the cap shall be 25. And we know that our junior class numbers are around that 24.5 average, slightly higher in intermediate. What is not encumbered in that cost is cert time out of service in September and October for the screening process. Almost a month of psych services supports dedicated to assessments, the testing tools and materials. And that is not something that we have said or indicated that we are pulling away from as a district. We know, again, from evidence-based, when we look at, those of you that have known me a long time, I try to draw, so it's really hard in a committee meeting live stream to not draw. But when we look at intellectual scores for students and we look at the normative curve, we recognize that those that have scores 0.1 to the second percentile, so the tail, and 98th and above, that the differentiation in the tails is actually more extensive than between the 25th and 75th in the middle of the curve. So learners who have intellectual scores 25th, 75th, have more similarity in their accommodation and learning needs than those within the two tails. So we know that when our teams engage in some of the screening and the testing, there is really critical information about how students need their programs to be individualized that exists for students in both ends of those, the tails of the intellectual scores. And then with the composite of the other, as you said, Kelly, those that carry second exceptionalities and needs met on an individual basis. If we were to exclude students with developmental disabilities from a possibility of hosting and having their needs met in their home school, that would be a discriminatory practice. When we hyperstream students who are intellectually gifted out of their home schools, it is a form of a push out. So what we have done is interrupted a process of automaticity that says you're an intellectually gifted learner, your accommodation needs can only be met in 6 of our schools. So when we look at it being 2025 and the importance of connection, having kind of one option, and we have families that have been offered spots for next year and have chosen, because of the conversations around individuality, to stay at home school, keep siblings together. I have a hard time in 2025 having a model that says you have to be in that classroom at one of those 6 schools to get your accommodation needs met, when we put forth a consultative special education plan for inclusion that says most can have their needs met in homeschool, some will need withdrawal or intensive support, and few will need separate and different. And so in order to get to a better place of choice, again, this board has been consistent on being a board of many paths to success and choices. We needed to interrupt the automaticity that sends kids out of their homeschool communities. So it's the yes and of needing to do it, and it was seated with the dislocations.
Thank you. My concern is that it seems like we're using language that's meant to protect groups that are often discriminated against, and we're using it now to, in a way, discriminate against another group. That language is there to protect people who historically have been forced into separate programs and were not given the opportunity. Nobody is forcing gifted learners into a gifted program. That's not actually what's happening here. And it feels like we're using this inclusive language that's meant to protect people who are often kept out of typical spaces. And we're using it to prevent other students from accessing environmental accommodations that they need. And that's concerning, because when we start to play with language like that to exclude people, that starts to affect every single group that's sitting at this table here, not just one.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree that automaticity is the word to be used in this process. I think what you were saying is true, that gifted learners are presented with different options. And I think Eva's point earlier is that if we are truly centering family and child experiences and needs, then we continue to offer those choices, and we continue to say, here are different ways in which your needs can be met. And how do you, as a family, as a student, as CERT, how do we all work together and see that these needs are going to best be met, rather than taking away options and choices?
I would just add on as well that, like, I think that that's a conversation to happen at the IPRC table, is to look at the students' strengths and needs and to make a decision with the whole team present about what the best placement for them is, not through a random draw. I think, like, I'm sorry, it's ridiculous. You wouldn't do that for any other group. You wouldn't say we have so many classes to support autistic students, let's have a draw. You might get a spot, you know, you can't do that. That's not fair. It's not equitable. It's not using common sense about how to support students at all. And again, it feels like it's just a way to kind of cover pulling back from services. I'm also not really sure about, Andrea, maybe you can provide more detail, because there was a discussion about the cost involved, and you were saying the cost of the teacher is the same, but there's all of these other like supplemental costs for the testing, but that's going to happen anyways, right? So like you said, like, unless the board makes a decision, which again, I'm guessing they aren't because that's been proven to be kind of discriminatory against certain groups as well, to pull back, their offering testing to. Those costs are gonna be there anyway, so what actually is the additional cost? Why are we pulling back on this? It feels to me like it's a way to justify maybe pulling back on other small class placements. I wonder about that.
So just briefly comment on that. I think when we look at, and you've seen different service models come up, and so I think where gifted sits a bit different is that we do engage, and we've had many conversations around assessments for the purpose of informing accommodations. And I would agree, it's really important that where we have information about students, it's responsive to being embedded. Where gifted sits differently is it's group screening to begin with. And so for no other purpose do we kind of walk into a classroom and say, who would like? But to Eva's point, the nuance of meeting the needs of those that are intellectually gifted is such an important nuance to be captured. That's why we do that. But so it's not to pull away from assessments. Really value our team members that are qualified and do that work and the outcome and the discussion with families, but it does position differently because for other students, there is a query that goes at the front to say assessment for the purpose of and how is it needed and will be used. And sometimes the data is classroom data first, or CERT assessment before we're moving into a clinical assessment. So just a bit different in terms of that. And then again, not wanting to kind of position kids in they're not. So you see what we put on screen earlier. As a district, there is that commitment to the learners, and you see us actually increase the number of specialized placement spots for those who require developmental life skills and things like that. So if it was a signpost for a withdrawal of service in that regard, you wouldn't see us at the same time as, and again, this isn't a decrease in the number of gifted classes, this is a hold at the number of gifted classes. You wouldn't see us also increasing at the same time similarly, which you see a net increase in the spots for students reviewed into those special education placements. So I just want to alleviate concern that that is not a conversation at any table at this time.
How do those increases match with the increase in population in the region though?
Yeah, the needs of the kids and coming forward in conversations with families and caregivers. And again, too, each of those class types carries students a list of considerations. We don't do a wait list. We do, to the points that you've both really importantly put into the space, that considerations are based on individual student needs. For that purpose, we do not use the language of a wait list because we use a list of considerations because there is a looking at needs. And so I really hear you both on, and we know that the random selection was imperfect to individualized choice, so we're looking at that. Again, lots of conversations around senior team. But again, we see an increase of students moving into the district with developmental needs. Medical science is, we have the privilege of meeting students that 6 to 8 years ago we would not have had the privilege of meeting. Because of medical interventions around accommodation. And so the increase to developmental classes in that way, the increase to students with life skills, the transition to work program for our 18 to 21-year-olds with intellectual and developmental disabilities is really key because that's what helps. We see an increase to kids going to college rather than adult programming or an increase to paid employment. And so that sets up stronger adult pathways and outcomes for kids. And so as a district, we are trying within a budget and a commitment to support a wide breadth of kids in a wide variety of ways. What I do feel strongly about as an asset to this is the pause to that automaticity is not a financially based decision. It's because it's honestly in alignment with the program being out of sync with the majority of kids being able to have their needs met in homeschool. And then looking at separate and different, this one sits opposite to that. So this is a philosophy and principle-based decision. This is not about financial cuts, which a lot of districts are in. for a lot of different programs. That is not where we're sitting, that is not where we anticipate sitting within core education funding, as the fastest growing district in the province as well. So a balance of all things, but I hear you on the random selection, I hear you on the communication, we'll take that back. But do I, with the team, and again, this isn't Michelle and I creating this, this is heavy consultation with senior team and decision, is that there needed to be an interruption to the automaticity that said your needs cannot be met in your homeschool, which in fact needs to be choice for families to say that they can. And then I just want to be respectful of presenters' time, so we need to pause and come back and have to do something.
Sensorina, did you actually have an agenda up for?
I did.
I saw that, okay, sorry, I'm gonna go to Sensorina, and then Eva, if you've got a final comment, and then I'm just, but we've got some people who've been very patiently waiting, and they have a very interesting presentation that we need to get to, so this is not gonna be done, I think, so, Sensorina,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
First of all, thank you for presenting this. Some of these concerns are not on my radar at all. Looking at the presentation and seeing the words random selection does not sit well with me. Like Sienna said, if I try to put that on the population that I serve, that would never, but I'm always solution based, so I'm hoping that I hear you, Andrea, saying that these things are on the table to be addressed. I'm hoping that so as the plan is being built, that SEAC can have some input so that it's brought back to the table, so that we can help give some advice on how possibly we can do this successfully to meet all children.
Eva? Yeah, so, I think my point, previously, I think the automaticity that I think is through the whole, gifted orientation sessions. And my connection between that French immersion, if there's two programs in this board that where there's movement in one grade level in a larger chunk, right? It's not, you know, a child here or there, it's in a larger chunk, and we would never do this over here on French immersion, but we're doing it to kids with exceptionalities. We've changed that for the children with exceptionalities. Last year was a different orientation session than any of the previous orientation sessions had been. Previous orientation sessions, we had facilitators who had been teachers within the gifted program, had experience with the gifted learners and sort of having those discussions. I attended, and I know as did you, Andrew, many of those, and it was never a push to these parents that you need to move your kid into this program. It wasn't a saying, nobody was standing there saying, your kid's needs cannot be met in the whole school. It was saying, this is the program, this is what it entails, this is where your child would be. Feel free to ask questions, but you have a decision to make here or here. Questions would be asked about French immersion, movement, and you know, extracurricular and all of those things. And the parents then left with the ability to go make an informed decision between maintaining their placement in their homeschool or moving in their children into the gifted program. There were many parents who kept their kids in the gifted or in the mainstream class and did not move them into the gifted program. Some chose to move them later. Some kids went from the gifted back to the mainstream, but those were always left as choices. This is not what's happening in this case. And I think that is where the concern really lies, is that has been taken away. So last year, the orientation sessions, it was given to the schools to put on a presentation. So I think they involved the kids, and it became what seemed like a sales pitch. Because the kids were excited to share what they do and what they learn and how their school operates and how the program operates. So I don't think last year was a fair comparison as to the way the program has previously been presented to parents as an automatic, you really need to do this, because I don't think that that's been the case, and it certainly wasn't for me. And again, I've attended many orientation sessions over the years that my kids weren't part of, and that's not what I've seen at any of those outside of last year. And I will concede that last year's orientations were very different than they had previously been. And I actually left many of them feeling as though the parents weren't actually given good information on kind of the background of their kids and some of the things that they should be aware of just overall for their children, including the asynchronous development information. Yeah.
And again, I don't, mine is, again, I appreciate that this table and every parent comes out of it a heart for good things for kids. My experience with the previous structure of orientation sits in dissonance. As a principal, my last principalship was at a triple track school with French immersion and gifted. And when we positioned, so the kids would come, parents and caregivers would receive information in an adult space, and kids would go spend time in the placement classrooms for experience. When we position information to families who are new to information that adds to their understanding of their child as an intellectually gifted learner, again, the kids are the same individual they were. It adds to our understanding of how we can accommodate and include. When we only position the information access to the supports, the background, as you've shared this evening, on traits of gifted learners, when that information only gets delivered at the 6 host schools and not through the children's home school where they have relationships and connections, there is an optic of your homeschool doesn't have this information. Only the 6 placement schools have this information, and it does create a bias in the placement and a pressure that we've seen in terms of that. So I just position a bit of a different, and we have been alongside in many of those sessions together. That mindset's a bit different, that where the information is accessed creates a bias with the information. So happy to we'll continue to answer parent and caregiver reach outs. We're meeting with a bunch of families, which is wonderful to hear about kids. And then any other further questions from SEAC, happy to gather that. I'm just super conscientious.
Yep, no, I
need to
sorry,
I don't want to truncate the conversation and want to make sure that you get the 30 my way, but I don't want to interfere with your chairship either.
Interesting time.
You came to a doozy of a meeting, sorry about that. Can I just offer one comment? I think I would be very curious to see, so there's the concern about the cap being, but how many children are actually saying, sorry, no room at the inn for this year? Are all children who with a Plinky would like to join a gifted placement? Are they able to, or are we in a space where literally if there are going to be kids that have to find accommodation outside in the
So we're in the middle of that process. So the families that were offered placements have until the 9th.
Right.
And then we will know. There is a mix of responses coming back from families.
And when someone chooses, that's one thing, but someone who's not offered a spot,
yeah, we
and
can bring
does
that.
does not get the option.
Yeah,
That
we'll bring that data back.
And the second thing that I would be curious about is about so for the children who do not get an opportunity to go to gifted program replacement, what does that transition plan look like? Well, how are we helping them with those transitions and recognizing they have more needs that we're now thrusting on a teacher who's already got who knows what else in the classroom in varying different levels of needs? And so how are we supporting the teachers so that those children are getting those supports and making sure fully aware that we now have a whole host of underlying issues as well with those kids? I would really like to understand how are we implementing those plans for those supports for those kids who aren't going to be able to get it delivered within a placement.
Okay, so having bring some of that information back, unless there's a flight where the suppression will where it can identify a student.
No, I'm not absolutely
so
privacy
that
fully
aspect to that.
Absolutely.
And then just positioning again with the learner pre-testing is the same human being. That they are post-testing. The testing just gives us more access to information and clarity around, again, tailoring. Because I also think, yes, in terms of intellectually gifted, about the 98th percentile, there's a cohort above the 95th that we also have to pay attention to in terms of differentiation as well. And so I don't want to lose the learners in that space as well. And so looking at that totality of supporting educators and meeting kids' needs for kids that were coming into their classrooms already is sold, so we can bring some of that back in. Sorry, back those chips.
Okay, I relinquish control.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're gonna move, oh,
Sorry, you must be on the board report.
yes, I was gonna say, we're gonna go on to board report.
Are we going to do this, or are we going to do this 30 credits my way?
The board report is just before that, I don't know
Okay,
how
so
long
it
the
will just
report
be
is.
very brief. I don't think it's necessary to prolong the meeting when we have our guests. So I'll just briefly summarize a few things that we've come up so far. So in a few of our last meetings, we had a DDS, so from the Standing Committee of April 7, we had a DDSB presentation on our mathematics in action. The system to student desk. We had Superintendent Mohammed Hamid provide an overview to the report on the 2024-2025 Math Achievement Action Plan. And the video highlighting the early impacts of the implementation of the math plan on student learning experiences at the Glen Rose Public School, which you can also view on the YouTube DDSB to watch a bit of that video. Also, there was our interim financial report that Andrew did touch on, which was by our Associate Director, David Wright, which basically was discussing an overview and a status update of our operating expenditures as of February 2025, which is also in a draft, but it gives us an idea of our operating expenditures. The last point, I like to share this one because it's about our Ignite Durham Learning Foundation. So the Ignite Durham Foundation plays a vital role in our school breakfast programs, and Trustee Arsenal, who sits as a representative, provided information that they raised for their Make a Difference auction, $69,435, almost doubling what they raised last year. So that's amazing, and there's also a tournament that's coming up to raise more funds, but it's an awesome program because they do a lot for our kiddos in the schools. So congrats them, and that's all for my report.
Does anybody have any questions with respect to the board report or comments? Okay, we'll move on to our presentation then on the 30 credits my way with Monique and Philippe.
Thank you for having us. Today we are excited to share a new approach to looking at the many paths to success and student choice and voice with regards to our secondary system. So as we know, the core beliefs for student success are that all students can be successful. Success comes in many different forms, and there are many paths to success. We can go to the next slide, please. So often when students take a look at success, they don't see what happens in between the start and the finish. And so they just see that it looks like a nice smooth trajectory. And the reality is it really sort of looks like that. You know, you have setbacks and sometimes you have challenges, and sometimes you completely change your whole plan. And then eventually you do get there. But often, you know, there's many different places where students need some support, or they might want to make some changes. They change their interests, or they like to look at a different program or something, another opportunity opens up. So we like to show that to students that, you know, it doesn't matter how long it takes to get there, whether you're fast or quick, and you choose other options, or you take a detour, you come back, you can still get to your goal. And so this is one of the things that we like to show, that success comes in many, many different forms. One of the things that we're really lucky in DDSB is we have so many different programs. We have many different experiential learning options. We have many different types of programs that align with students' interests and student needs. And so one of the things that we were challenged with when we had our new director is, you know, how can we bring all of the different things that we have and make it into sort of not a one-stop shop, but where everything is presented so that students and parents have an understanding of everything that's offered, and they're more empowered, and they're able to discuss together what are the options, and then advocate with their high school guidance counselors on some of the different pathways that are there. We also wanted to ensure that there's transparency at every school and consistency at every school. So it doesn't matter what school you're going to, you are offered the same type of opportunity, so equitable opportunities and equitable outcomes. And it doesn't matter what guidance counselor you're speaking to, what administrator you have, and what location your school's at. And so this is what we sort of brought together, and I'm going to pass it over to Kuldeep Chahal, because he is I'd like to give him credit for taking this vision and actually bringing it to fruition into what we call 30 credits by it.
It was definitely not just me, it was a team approach, working in different environments. Just a big ability before I get into 30 credits now. I serve as a cert of Donnie Wilson Secondary School, so thank you for the conversation was very intriguing for me to hear, and families and are keen to hear what the concerns are, and my understanding of it. And part of the reason why I came into my role today was to kind of be more transparent and inclusive in regards to our options here at DDSB, and I kind of find them aligning now. As we begin to have more of these conversations, as it's been mentioned in this meeting, our board is growing, and it's growing very quickly. And the information is not getting out as quickly as we need it to, or landing the way it needs to. That's why it was really the goal of why we started to look at how do we put it a different approach, so that something not maybe new, but it's out there at least for everyone to understand. So this is why get the making my chief. So again, we wanted to create some learning environment, some environments that unleashes the full potential full potential of our genius students. I apologize. I sure dropped a bit, so I was trying to regulate myself, so I do apologize if that's okay. It's important to find students out in explore and select from a diverse range of program opportunities. I think we got here to speak. This approach most acknowledges that it's diverse, and that we can create personal pathways for all our students here at the a lot of the conversation that we had about the 95% for the normal curve, and two tails at the end. And that was something that we put into our thought process when we did our 30 credits my way to make sure that we included the voice of all our students. And here too, we showed our pathway guide that shows that how it's represented.
And then one of the things that we also wanted to acknowledge is that a lot of our students have very diverse talents, they have very diverse interests, and that they should actually have diversity in selecting their programming options. We wanted to ensure that everything that the ministry allows is enabled for our students. And whether that is, part-time studies, acknowledging language credits that they're taking, if they're doing science, science-centered courses, or whatever they have, even outside, that we're building that into their current programming, and also listening to their voice on what they need to be successful, and finding creative ways to meet their needs.
I think along with the transparency piece, making sure the system can support grades and making sure that the rubric opportunities that might be more prevalent in one school is also shared at other schools which may not have that opportunity. What I realized quickly as well is that we're large and we're very big geographically, so things that apply, let's say, to the green high school might be much different from what Brock has to go through, and kind of making sure that we keep that in tune when we make our decisions. If you might, what's the names there? So as that graphic you saw and a couple of slides earlier, I knew with our guys last year we started on the 30 credits my way. I'm like, how did you get? Tell me your program. And the majority, we see the ones that came up big were the big ones that everybody was handling, but after a while started slowing down and thinking, what do we offer? So even for a guidance counselor like myself, we're meeting with students for 15 to 20 minutes, it's hard to kind of broadcast all the different opportunities, whether it be your RELC opportunities or your international language opportunities.
And RELC is recognition for experiential learning, so it's a credit opportunity.
That students can earn based on learning that they do themselves. So it's not through a credit that is granted through a traditional program. So we have a student that decided to make an app and took a course and got a certification from Microsoft from it. we're able to get that credit along with our support from our fellow teachers. So it's something that we're piloting, but we're going to sure that the schools have an opportunity to explore that as well. You know, even our e-learning opportunities through, whether it be through our continuing education program or Team Foster Homeschool, it's something that we want to make sure that we engage all our activity partners in. The one thing that is kind of we've been doing, but it seems to be hush a lot, was building a plan for students through the accommodation that they need. As we see that mental health support is much needed, we've started to look away and tear away, you know, you must have 12 courses or 8 courses a semester. You must do this. We're now allowing it to be more personalized for the students. What we're finding is that a student may not, especially our Centers for Success program would be an example, that students can't handle a full day class. And then if they miss one class, that then causes a barrier for attendance because they missed the first period class, now they build the skills, now it starts the avoidance, and then from there, snowball, and then they have traffic left in small ones. So for that reason, you know, we beginning to make it known for families to understand that if there is a reason this child needs a part-time timetable, it's allowed, right? Schools, you know, we're afraid to make that conversation more public because they're afraid of the halls being busy. And they're like, well, no, if the student needs it for an accommodation or a program they're in or an athletic type program as well, they should be able to be given that time to do what they're doing. We have some students that are quite diverse, have a lot of family obligations that we see our local populations coming in. We're finding that they can't attend a full 4-day courses because they got family obligations, like taking grandma or dad to the doctors and speaking and being that translator.
Or even part-time jobs. So a lot of our newcomers, we like to make sure that we're able to help support, and sometimes the eldest who's coming is responsible for working. So how can we accommodate, you know, whether it's a half-time schedule and they do a night course, we're getting them a paid co-op. So they're continuing in their education, but they're also getting paid at the same time. Just really looking at all the different needs and having the students decide what is in their best needs, going on with their conversations with their parents, and then making it happen. So really it's about getting to be us and ensuring that they have all of the different creative options available to them.
And making those informed decisions, right? What's best for the student? What's best for the family in regards to their academic outcome?
And often we talk about if the student, you know, we're looking at mental health or whatever other considerations there are, if the student needs a part-time timetable, because that's how they're going to be successful. We don't see a need that they have to take a full-time timetable where they're then going to completely withdraw and disengage from school. We want to make sure they're successful. And, you know, then maybe we can start looking at maybe reintegrating for a third, plan or a third section and move with that. So it's very fluid, it's very flexible. Every semester is a new semester, but now students really get to think about all the creative options they can put together. And we kind of looked at it, you know, when we were first discussing, we were saying, you know, like a sushi menu, like you get to pick this and this and this, and then this becomes what you're taking, but that you have everything available and accessible to you. We can go to the next slide.
And I think that was the important piece to was that when we are looking at all the programming that we do, it's nothing that we very much shadow. It was arming our families with the knowledge and information beforehand so that when they're meeting with their guidance counselors or CERTs or ISS departments, they can come in with dialogue versus, you know, how do I help you? Right? How can you try X, Y, and Z? So the whole role really has been to give up information and to start prompting those conversations. So that when the one thing that our guidance students would like to share back is that we want to support our students by understand what their needs are, so that we can chat and ways or not the whole because that's something we believe the students should be doing with their families with the guidance and support of the teams at school.
And trying to move away from, you know, having guidance more of a supportive role rather than selecting courses for students. So it is building that proactive
preliminary sort of research for parents and families so they can understand. And then when they do the first selection, the empowerment is in the hands of the student.
And as we're working with documents, things are changing constantly. As we hear, we're solving for technical papers, along with a lot of guidance updates I'm hearing that will be going out. So expect this document to change.
It's a living document and a living website. And so one of the pieces that with the rollout of this, and again, it's nothing new, it's just how we're sharing our information. We had to think of how we're going to share this information. And there were a few pieces that with our communication team and our creative services teams, we developed a few pieces. So I'll let Kuldeep go through sort of the different materials that we've shared with that you have at your table today and how it's used to navigate course selection.
Absolutely. So it started with a couple. So essentially, we first started finding with what does journal look like? This is the pathway for our students, 9 to 12 students entering, all our students entering into our school, and what could be their problem pathway. The theme that we picked was to kind of circle around what key landmark for each of students would be probably getting a driving license or looking at the idea of driving. So that's where the idea of things that would kind of play with their own learning and resonate back to the path here. So essentially, this is geared to all to be inclusive. It's geared to be transparent, all information here, and very accessible for all students. So starting with the accessible piece. Well, we have 2 QR codes that are on this page. The QR code will give you right to our site, so there's more information for all the opportunities that are available here, including our 30 credits guide. Now, the problem with the 30 credits guide is that when we make these and when they go to print, things change. And so we're looking at, we spend a lot of money, time, and resources in printing off these guides just so that they get to our parents' hands by January, and then that's why it's not relevant.
And the ministry gets a new program, it takes away a program.
Right, so we decided, okay, we want to give this to where it's probably the most painful. It's probably those grade 7, 8 families in elementary who really have a lot of questions about, high school and 30 credits my way, so that they can start fostering the next 4 or 5 years and building trust themselves. So we've now made it to make sure that all the grade 8s will get an actual guide to share with the families at all. We're still suggesting, however, that all the information can be received from a postcard, cheaper as well. So we can put it back to student planning and student development and so on. So that leads you back to our webpage and also a very good guide that they want downloaded or credits or comments. Now, most students are reading guides. Some parents like to fall asleep and have hard times sleeping. Might want to read this. It is content heavy, right? And it is there if it's a supplement towards getting some information that you might want to ask questions about. So in the center of the guide, we made sure to have what we have in front of you is our roadmap to 30 credits. I'll go over the back in a minute, but essentially, I just want to highlight a couple of things. As we discussed many times tonight, there's no direct path to most of our students from starting grade 9 and grade 12. There are bumps in the road, there's assessments that we don't like to take, the OSLT or other things that kind of deviate to our true paths. But one thing we do know is that when students enter grade 9, they have the full potential to improve everything more. And it doesn't limit anybody to end up, rather be a certificate of accomplishment, which is usually something for students if they aren't able to earn our credits. There's the OSSC, which is our Area Secondary Civil Certificate, where you want the number of credits that's 14 credits in order to get a graduation certificate, and our OSSC. Now, it could happen that a student starts in grade 9, hoping to get an OSSC, but it might take time. All our students are able to stay in high school to 21, but life throws in a curveball. They may leave, they may need to come back, get some extra supports from our student success departments, things like DAS, our continuing education departments. They might have to go there for a bit and come back and be put on track. some students might say, hey, you know, I'm gonna go and work for my dad's work, and they really want just a piece of paper, so they might go out and open up 14 grants that they need to get the minimum finance to get a job or career. And some of our students continue to try, get the experiential learning and the credits that they are taking. You know, it is something that Michelle and I and Rika talked about, including ISS to students at the beginning, and it's like learning recipe project students to make sure that all our students are taking courses and picking courses, whether they have to take classes or the classes that they get to pick, the little integration courses that we and move away from the practice of, you know, this is all we got left. So it's this, or you stay here, you'll be fine. So that's learning we're taking back to our teams, making sure that it's an equitable process for all our students. The second period takes us to a break our mind. So our Mind Blueprint programming now allows you to take a look at automation planning, what's required. So oftentimes students will come to me and say, you know what, I want to be a civil engineer. Great. What is it? I don't know. And I'm like, well, can you just tell me what you think it is? You know, things to do with cars. Oh, okay. Very cool. So what do you want to do with cars? You know, fix them. Oh, okay. That's fair. But let's go kind of figure out what civil engineering means and let's do our backward design and see how to get it. And my group has videos and other things. I'll have another discussion on another day for them to get an understanding of what that term means, because they hear from their friends. And what we know is that when our students who we don't have a plan, they'll lean up against their bestie and say, oh yeah, civil engineering, think that's good? All right, I'll do that too. And then they're making informed decisions all the way through because they're just copying whatever it is. And that becomes hurtful because now they've now been spinning for 2 years, not knowing what they're chasing because someone put it in their head and said, oh. That's where this IPP and the individual capital planning comes into effect. That could be a day if you want me to come back to show you how that works. But essentially, it's a way for them to do their survey to find out what kind of things they are. And every time they do their 5 surveys, it kind of aligns with a whole bunch of career opportunities for them to pursue. And then from there, they kind of look at what post-secondary pathway they should proceed. They could go back to courses. So we're going to quickly turn back to the market. And this is an exercise that we want our parents to share with their students. And this is something you can always download. And this pretty much shows the requirements for 30 credits that you need for 30 credits. Here's instructions about the backward design from IPP, just in case it's a lot of information for families to follow on, but step by step, it gets it. And what we encourage our families to do, definitely start filling out grade 12 courses that are required. So whatever you need for grade 12 is connected with what you should take for grade 11.
And you can also do it for certificates. You can start from the 14 credits that go backwards. So it works, it can be applied to any pathway.
Right, so the idea is essentially getting the next tool in their hand that can start planning right away versus a big textbook for them to carry around right to their high school. So I read this that way. So the idea, again, back to the 3 credit is to kind of definitely go out and see all of the experiential things are. And the biggest myth was we can't do paid co-op here in DDSB. And now we're putting in that yes, if you can arrange paid co-op, that's an opportunity for students to happen. And that's a discussion we have co-op. Going further along, and again, notice it's not linear because we don't want it to be linear because every student has a different, but there are still landmarks for students to kind of track those things. With the different transitions from, you know, representing what grade they should be. But again, it doesn't discourage our students that take their longer to get to 8 or 16 hours. Now in the guidance role, the term that we use is 16 by 16. Right? That's our target for our students. But sometimes that 16 might be 1%. And for some students, it's when they're maybe 14 or 15 because they're doing things in summer school, ahead of next school, or further, so on. But not to forget, we want to make sure if you have questions, you can ask them. You ask your in-count, men people, guidance people, your certs for guidance, right? It shouldn't be, Katie. Connor, what should I be?
And some of the other pieces that we wanted to make sure we're breaking myths, like, you know, that you can't fast track or you can't slow down. So what you'll see is that there's some signs here that Colby Quinn envisioned as like the 407. So summer school options, night school options. So some students actually, it is much better for them to move quicker. I have a family that I worked with who was helping support using 30 credits my way. The student who is on the spectrum wants to be structured all summer and so wanted to have 2 summer school courses. Also wants very much so to have grade 11 and 12 so that it's only a half day. And so by accelerating the course, now grade 11, they're going to grade 11 next year. They have mornings that they've selected for both grade 11 and grade 12, and the rest of the days off. This is how they've planned it for themselves. And so this is what they wanted to do. So we don't want to limit you to want to do that. Some students may only want to take 2 credits in the daytime, but then 1 night school credit because that works for them. So all of these opportunities are here, and then you can see the experiential learning opportunities with all students can access. And then the detour, so if they might need a student success support, they can detour and then come right back onto the road. And that includes our Centers for Success program. And then we also have something called prior learning assessment recognition, which is the ministry has looked at any student who's over 18. We can look at doing what's called a PLAR. And because of their life experience and their age, we can actually accelerate them through by some prior learning assessments. So if they need 12 credits, it doesn't look so daunting. So we're recognizing that. And then there's lots of different opportunities through Durham Continuing Ed. And then as well, there's some external opportunities like the Conservatory of Music or exchange programs with students. And sometimes students do take some private school credits. And so, you know, that's a choice that the family and the student has made. And we look at that and incorporate that and honor that into their programming. So whatever the students and parents decide, we have a lot of students who are coming with international languages, which is wonderful, and credits for, and that's another piece that helps them get to their destination. So the nice thing about having an online presence is we can update it like this when there's a new program. So it's always live, it's always up to date, it never falls behind. We're unfortunate by the time this gets printed and sent out, often it's lagging, and so it's not as up to date. So this is a live site that you can go to anytime, it's interactive, and it'll take you down all the different pathways. And then it also suggests other places you can get more information.
So we want to thank you for the collaboration. I think what you will find is that the transition guide and pathway planning for students with intellectual and developmental disability looks exactly the same, purposefully. And what I really appreciate is really the acknowledgement in terms of giving our students that are supported through an IEP choices. So choices in terms of when they get to secondary school, in terms of if they are supported through a PLP, through the PLP class, to be able to take credits that are of their interests and their strengths and needs, and then to be able to, as we know, as principals of schools, of students that are supported in a PLP class, for example, who do end up being able to get their OSS, their certificate. I'm sorry, I always remember all that language. So really, I think what's really important is that this document, as well as the other document that we presented earlier, really work in tandem, and they work as, when Ashley Romano was here, work at gate posts, like ages of what's really important. So it does, there are documents that can work in parallel to one another in terms of pathway planning, individualized pathway planning for students in secondary school. So thank you for that.
And we want it to be bright and exciting. And then when students, you know, work backwards, so that, you know what, I really like baking, or I really like cooking, and this is what I want to do. Okay, well, these are some options. Now let's map it backwards, right? What do you need to do to get there? Okay, well, there's 3 pathways to get into cooking or culinary or whatever you want. Let's take a look at those 3 pathways and what you need. And then let's start planning. We know that students, once they have that spark of what they potentially want to do, we know that at that point, disengagement has reduced, right? Because they now have this passion and they think, oh, I can do this. And they start moving forward. It's when they really don't know what is available to them and what aligns with their interests and passions,
where they start to disengage. And so that's sort of our goal, is to light that fire and get them excited about all the different possibilities. But we know that, it's only a dream if you don't have a plan. So you do need the plan to go along with the dream, and the two together will get our students where they need to be. So thank you again for inviting us and having us part of your meeting. We're always happy to answer questions down the road too. If we could possibly share our emails and any information that you need. But our administrators, our guidance counselors, our student success teams have all been in service. They know all about this. So when you say 30 credits my way, they're well versed in it now. So they are prepared to come with the questions from families and students.
And if there's a student need or a situation that is very complex, I love those situations, call me and I'll be very happy to help guide, and service.
We problem solve all the time if there's unique situations, and put together lots of possible opportunities and different things and present it to families and say, hey, these are the options you have. We'll let you sit with it, think about it, and let us know what you'd like to do. So thank you again.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Do we have any questions? Comments? We'd like to, yeah.
I would have to let the other rest of everyone else have access.
Anybody else have any? Bro, go ahead.
So this is the first time it's been created?
Yeah.
This year.
Okay, no, I just think it's excellent. I think meeting these individuals at a portion of their life where, they might not know the path. And I think what you said there, I was reading something the other day and we were talking about people misinterpret laziness for lack of direction. So once you know, and they might know what they want to do, the baker, for example, might not know how to get there. And that working back to show them, and the plan, working with them, the plan's supposed to be given a plan. I think it grounds it within them, and now they see that path, and now they light up. And just as you said, and I just like that there's different parts, sections along this path. Because some people that are coming back. Some of the things, I had some friends who don't really go to school all the time because they had to help with their parents, such and such. And so those are real life situations, and you're addressing real, and your team are addressing real life situations. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Ron. Tara, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just adding on that, I really feel that this becomes empowering for students, which is fantastic, especially once you get out of the school. You are able to sort of take control, learn some advocacy for yourself in those situations. So it's baby steps in that road, but it's recognizing that there's options, and what works for me in my situation doesn't necessarily work for Timmy next door. But being able to express that and have the support with, I love the whole conversation you were having, like, I gotta go to my afternoon job because that's what I need to do for my family. I'm gonna go in the mornings, I'm gonna take night school. Like, that was not a thing when I was going through school. Many moons ago, you should. But it was, this is school, this is what you do, and you sit in there, and it was very expected, and this is just what you do. And I love the fact that this is recognizing that, like, it's way more complicated than that right now. And gives kids those options, and in some cases, relief of stress, because now I can help, and I don't have to quit my job if I want, but I also want to go to school because I want to learn how to bake it. So that gives us those options. So to me, that is many, many positives in all of that plan. And hopefully the kids are able to get into it and respond to it and recognize that they can take advantage of it as well. So are we planning capacity in the system to allow for that flexibility in terms of staffing for different types of classes and, and those sorts of things? Like, how are we gonna help ensure that that capacity is there to support if kids just start being inflexible? I want to do a whole bunch of everything. How are we gonna manage that?
So basically, the student's course selection process drives what's offered in schools.
Mm-hmm.
So when they pick their courses and they're picking multiple different ways of doing it. It drives what is going to be offered the next year. One of the reasons, I worked at DAS as principal at DAS for 3 years in STEM alternative. We could do anything for students there. Kids would come and we could do anything. And one of the things that really bored me is I always said, why aren't we doing this at all schools? Like if we can do it at DAS, we can do it at all schools. They shouldn't have to leave their school to get access to all of these programming options that are available. And so with in-servicing and working with principals to understand everything that's available, because they need to have a wholesome understanding, and with guidance counselors, it's sort of changing the perception that students have to sort of fit into what schools have to offer, and rather we're creating what students need. So, it's the student that we're serving, it's a servant, leadership, I look at it that way. And so we have to make sure we're offering what they need rather than, well, we're trying to fit them into our mold. And so once that understanding is out there now, but we've now empowered the parents and the students with the language, so that when they go in, they know what they're entitled to and being offered. And that changes the game, right? It changes the whole, because now the conversation is, well, I know this is what I have to offer. These are what my child would like to do. I'd like your support on helping get there. Let's look at what options are available, and then we'll make a decision on how we'd like to do it. And none of these things are things that are new. So these aren't new programs. It's just consistent and transparent and done in a way that everyone knows what is available, and the principals have to commit to supporting that, and that's an understanding.
And what we're finding with some of our students around, they're beginning to kind of full plan their 30 credits in their graduation, or the path that they want to go, is that we're finding now, and if you look at the top honors at work, National College, University, Community Living, the one that we left out was gap year function. And we're finding out more and more students are saying, if I could finish the semester early, I could go travel. And if you look at our demographic, our mosaic, someone, the travel may be going back home for a semester, connecting with family, and then going to university. So they're beginning to kind of figure out paths that we didn't even see were possible. So they're much more intuitive than we are in regards to looking at those options. But going back to that, this is fall, we're sharing a very, very highlighting one. There's been situations where we had to say, hey, life's hard right now for you. School is not really the place to worry about right now. We're here to help you when you get back. Just take care of it.
We still want to keep them engaged. So how can we keep them engaged while meeting their needs so that even they still have that connection with that person? And one of the good things that have come out of this is we have re-engagement counselors who work with students who are past, so they haven't graduated, but they've done their 4 years and they're kind of in nowhere land. Those numbers decrease significantly since schools are able to better program for them, which means there's less need for re-engagement. And we get lots of positive feedback from parents and from administrators that they didn't realize, even administrators, all of the possible creative options they have. They just didn't know, right? And they didn't know it was okay to make this, unique custom programming. And so now that everyone has that in their hands, students' needs are better met. And so what we're hoping is we won't have any students needing re-engagement counselors, and that we are able to meet all of their needs. And any students who do take a break after, we do keep connected with our re-engagement counselors, so we can touch base and say, hey, how's things are going? Do you want to look at re-engaging so we can finish off?
Kelly? Yeah, thank you so much. Now I understand, because you did ask me before about the 30 credits my way, and it's very comprehensive. I like that there's a single document to kind of put everything together. I kind of wish I had a guide like that when I was in grade 9. It's kind of like starting and stopping, you change your mind, and then you gotta go electives was the term that you have to do your electives. And so and my question is regarding 2 things. So I see the priority assessment and recognition. And I understand that I like the idea of that, giving opportunities for students who have taken other things out and recognizing their achievements outside of the school system. However, I was just wondering, for students that are at the grade 9 level, would there be any consideration for doing like a pre-assessment, like for kids who don't know what it is, that they have no idea, high school's overwhelming, I have no idea what my interests are?
So we're seeing a lot of MLO students who are coming to Canada, and they're coming at 60. So they don't have any grade 9, grade 10 credits. But yeah, we want them to kind of graduate, so you need to do a first point. So we begin to say, hey, let's kind of fret forward this. We can worry with your other electives or grade 9, grade 10 when it comes to applying, because you're going to be your grade 18. So let's put it off your timetable, so you don't have to worry about those courses you need to do right now, because you indicate that you have a lot of life experiences based on your outcome, your past, your lived experiences to get our credits. Just right now, the government will allow until you're the age of 18 or turning 18. So that's a year or 2 years down.
And that's for mature bar.
For mature bar. Another junior bars that we can do as well. So oftentimes we have students, similar to like the Royal Conservative Music, are doing credits or doing programming that's very extensive that aren't getting credits for. They may come from different provinces, different countries, but are English-speaking students. We're able to challenge it either for a mark if it's a compulsory course, or award them a junior credit based on whatever that experience is.
Students could be awarded 4 challenge credits by their principal, and it's their principal discretion, but what they would do is challenge that they have the knowledge, and that would be for a junior. Now, with regards to preparing students for this, the grade 8 teachers and the counselors that were in the schools, as well as administrators, are also starting to use this, so that when they're starting to think about course selection process, we're actually even going back to grade 7. They're starting to understand the pathways, and then our facilitators and our coaches are also going in to show them ideas around OYAC, co-op, SHSM, skilled trades, already starting those conversations and exposing them to those opportunities in grade 7 and 8, and even younger. We're actually looking at starting a kindergarten, grade 2, starting some of the STEM skilled trade pieces, so that the language and the ideas and the pathways are already there and embedded, and that all students have the exposure and the opportunity to experience it and see if, you know, that spark is happening. Oh, I really liked when I was doing that building of this project, or I love that STEM activity. And then it actually helps them start to get an idea of what do they like, what are they, you know, what are their strengths and not. So that, if you're looking at sort of pre-assessment pieces of that, definitely those are happening in conversation, grade 7 and 8.
If you get a chance in March-ish, which Bishop is our
community connected experiential learning facility.
He runs our elementary skills trade day.
And he assisted with the inclusive skills trade.
And we had so many students come in and try different career pathway skill trades that day.
Like 800.
It was amazing. We had community development, like for what's that? Like we had health and safety inspectors. We had grade 6 students where health safety had get a clipboard and walk around all the different venues, putting out what's not safe and putting in that experience. We had animation going on. I think he had 21 different skill trades.
Culinary, landscaping, robotics.
An open invitation when it happens, like, sir, please, if you want to see something that's amazing on grade 6 and grade 7, it's not happening just in high school, it's happening much before, please.
And one of the nice things is they didn't know who I was, but I was sitting at the door just helping people and making sure the children were running out of the training center. And I heard parents leave, and one thing that I heard really loud and clear is 2 parents were like, this is amazing. Our children are in good hands and the future is bright. And when I heard that, I was like, yes, we did it, right? When they come and see that and feel that you know, the future is bright for their children, we know we're doing a good thing.
I will add, from an elementary perspective, when we're looking at timetabling, we're actually looking at the STEM component and being used as a coverage role. In my prior school, we had 2 practical learning program, and that we had a teacher that would, and teacher librarian that would do STEM. And that was a new reverse integration for our PLP students, was to work with all of our mainstream. And it's beautiful. So this one boy, he was in grade 8 and he had a drill and he was drilling. And it was a moment where he has never been engaged in school. And like, I just had tears, like it was just beautiful. So those pieces, like they do reach those students who never would have seen themselves with regular mainstream students doing the exact same thing, those opportunities.
Yeah, we want to ensure that every student in every school has equal opportunity to these experiences so they can start seeing where that fire is coming from and have that light bulb moment.
It was many light bulb moments and a few tears.
Yeah,
Good tears too, for you.
good tears.
Yes, happy tears. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that presentation coming out. Some great stuff here, I have to say. Very much appreciate that. Okay. Okay, moving on then to association reports to committee report. Does anybody have any association or committee report? I think this is my thought. Bill? Okay, correspondence. You don't have any? Community concerns, does anybody have? Yeah, go ahead.
So I had touched on this as a question a couple of meetings ago, but I wanted to bring it up formally as a community concern. I'm hearing from a lot of families, that they're being told, and it's very similar messaging, so it's not just happening at one school, that they're being told that the DDSB doesn't do IPRCs for kindergarten. And I know that some families have said, yep, their kid did get an IPRC in kindergarten, but overwhelmingly, most families are being told, we don't do that for kindergarten, or that's our goal to have in place for grade 1. Or all of these other kind of workarounds that are basically saying, we aren't going to do that for you. And I'd like to know why. I understand not every child needs a separate placement, but every child with a diagnosis that falls under the exceptionality categories is entitled to have an official identification and an official IEP.
Yeah, so through you guys now.
Yeah.
So one of the things we always want to be able to do is it's about the right time for each individual student and finding those right moments for each individual student, because when we start, we're very aware and very conscientious of the fact that sometimes when that exceptionality is there, for some families, it's 100%, it makes a lot of sense at any particular given time to be able to walk through that. But for a lot of families and for a lot of students, there's sometimes we hear on the flip side as well, and I think we've talked about that as well around, it sometimes places a label for a student that is worrisome. For some families, that's no, I see that as something that is really empowering. It allows me to look at a lot of things and lots of strengths and lots of programming considerations. We also want to look at also what is the timing and is the whole thing of and why now? So again, within all the considerations that a family is bringing forward, that consideration again, just like as part of our regulation, part of consideration when we have that going forward. Yeah, we will always honor again in terms of where that IPRC, if it is being brought forward again within the processes that do exist in the province, we will work through that process. Again, that's part of our commitments as the district as well. But it's really about trying to meet those individual considerations for each individual student. And it isn't that it's a, no, we don't identify within kindergarten. It's understanding that, is this the right time to be able to look at this for this particular student and looking at that program as well, because we understand that the curriculum for kindergarten, that 4 frames curriculum, that is part of it, is really adaptable. It is really valuable. It is really suited towards that exploration, that consideration for how we are seeing students navigate throughout spaces and places. And when we look at that, we want to be able to sit within that space and make sure that it's really about the right time for when students are there. So it's not that it's a, no, we don't identify that particular club. That's a, I guess it's an urban legend that I think sometimes gets circulated within spaces and places. It's not a reality. It's something, but again, we also don't want to necessarily rush towards identification. We want to be able to make sure that we are doing that at the right time for the student and their particular program considerations as well.
Is there a difference in the reality IEP versus IPRC?
So in this board, to my knowledge, in order to have an IEP, an official one, you need to have an IPRC. So legally,
I thought it was sort of the other way around.
no.
We are, the majority of students do have a formal IPRC in place.
We do have a few hundred students that do have IEPs without IPRCs. It's generally around fine motor and technology access.
So the information I've been given is that those are unofficial IEPs.
An IEP is an IEP, period. Like if you have an individual education plan, you have an individual education plan. What Connor is sharing is around, we move to documentation such as IPRC and an IEP when there is accommodation or differentiation needed outside of what is being provided in the overall classroom. And the 4 frames of the kindergarten curriculum is highly differentiated for every individual student. And so the need to go separate and unique from what is the universal design and differentiation built into the classroom doesn't appear in the same way for the majority of students as it does when we get into the curricular content of grade 1 and grade 2, that the design of the kindergarten classroom has the flexibility and the requirements around meeting the majority of students' needs. So again, we're going separate and unique when it is different than what is provided as a whole class model. And our kindergarten classes are highly differentiated. We do recognize that for many families, particularly those that have come from infant and child development, through Grandview School, and different pathways, that the diagnoses and the differential and the alternate curriculum needed to meet students' needs do require documentation in terms of an individual education plan, such as health, safety, well-being, personal care needs. I think of many of our students with nursing care and medical needs that way. But for the majority of students, including those with early diagnosis of autism and many others, the differentiation within the actual kindergarten classroom is already there. And so we go separate, different, and documented uniquely because it is an individual education plan. So that criteria of what is different and unique and individual for the student. And so sometimes that is where our schools are saying, let's just slow it down a little bit to make sure in terms of that, and particularly around different categories that can carry stigma, such as the diagnoses or needs that come under behavior or exceptionality. So do we kind of slow it down a little bit? Yes. But as Connor said, is it a binary? Absolutely never no. Not at all. It's a conversation in consultation with the school leaders and us centrally to make sure that the kids are getting what they need in terms of accommodation.
So it's problematic then because families are receiving no as an answer to that. They're receiving no to requests in writing for IPRCs, which legally should.
And we can follow that up. Yeah, the IPRC guide's very clear on parents' entitlement to submit requests to principals.
Offered an IPRC, which I think is problematic, because I think parents should be entitled to know what their rights are.
Mm-hmm. And it's very clear in our guide, the parents' right to request a formal IPRC in writing.
But if you come to kindergarten and you aren't aware of the education system and you say my child has autism, or my child has Down syndrome, or my child has whatever diagnosis, and you aren't given an IPRC package to let them know what their rights are, how are they ever going to know that?
Fair. And we would be expecting the certs and principals to be providing that information, but here you are again.
On top of that, I think it's concerning because how do you document the goals that children are working on when they do have individual needs if you don't have an IEP for them? And if it's not, my concern is around the legality of the IEP as well. If they don't have an IPRC, does the IEP, whether it's official or not, legally have to be followed?
Yes, because it is legal document. And I would also position in that that when we look at records of learning plans and communication of learning and records, that teachers and ECEs and where that's triangulated often with educational assistants or other classroom support staff, the pedagogical tracking and documentation of students' achievement, interests, well-being, and accommodations within kindergarten classes, highly differentiated, multimodal, photos, conversations, products, and again, a lot of our elementary administrators
we'll talk to the early years teams about the transparency of that with families and caregivers. So many times our early years teams are using communication tools like Remind 101 and others connections, because we know that the little ones can't always transfer the experience that they have at school. So that home-school partnership for what is going on, what is informing program, and how is that individualized for all of the learners in the early years classroom is really, really key.
Yeah, just wondering if what the harm would be if a family is saying, this is what I want, and we're talking about maybe slowing it down until grade 1, but there really would be no harm in providing the art for those families, right? And the stigma of the diagnosis, the child already has a diagnosis, and it's not, other children are not really at that level of understanding, so it would be a stigma coming from the adults, right?
Like to say, I think there's a lot of harm that comes from a system that thinks that there's stigma involved in a diagnosis. So when the adults involved feel like autism is stigmatizing, then you're putting a lot of unconscious bias into those children, what their needs are, what their abilities are, and what their limits may or may not be.
And a lot of these families have early interventions when it either speech, OT, PT, so have received goals from those professionals that I would assume they would want implemented immediately, documented immediately, just to keep track of.
And a lot of them do link with the 4 frames of the kindergarten curriculum, and looking forward to the release of the new curriculum coming as well. And then always up for reevaluation depending on that, because a lot of those receptive expressive communication goals within the 4 frames allows for that breadth, including the clinical advised goals and strategies. But hear you, and we'll take it back for thinking.
I think the concern also is when we are taking away small class replacements and we have kids with high needs coming into a big busy
Nobody's
program,
taking away.
or not offering them. And you have kids with high needs coming into a big busy kindergarten class without EA support. How are they being supported? Are they being supported? When you have a kid coming in who's non-speaking and you say, my kid needs to use an AAC of some kind, or pick, picture words or something. How do you know that teachers are using it and that your kid isn't sitting in a corner being given an iPad to keep them busy all day? Because I think the reality of day-to-day for a lot of kids is that's what's actually happening. And when we're turning parents away from getting an IPRC process in place, we're turning away the accountability to make sure that our kids' needs are met, and that's concerning.
And we're taking away parents' voice, because when they're requesting this and then they're met with the wall of, we don't do that, that doesn't happen here, that was from your last board, that's not, when you come up with that, what is the parent supposed to respond to that? And documents can be there and you can direct them to that, but at the school, the administrators and the CERT and whoever else was in that room is saying, we don't do this here, you need to wait until you're in grade 1. That's the problematic, really the truly problematic part, because we're saying we want parents' voice and we want parents to speak into this process, but then on the other hand, when they are trying to advocate for their child, especially when, as you mentioned before, Jessica, about having all of these interventive pieces that they've had from the time the child was diagnosed or when they were born, to be stonewalled at that place is tremendously problematic. So if this system, if DDSB hasn't been able to communicate that information to their CERTs at this point, then there is a big problem in the system. If that is the way it's supposed to be, and it has been that way for a long time, and it's a legal document, and all of that clarity is supposed to be that you can direct parents to it, then why do the teachers and the CERTs in particular and administrators not know that? So when they have that conversation, which would be a separate private conversation, not just in the hallway or on the field or at the drive, the kiss and ride, would they not have that information? So I've had a similar situation with a parent who's been, you know, asking for support as well, who's moved from one board to another, and who had an IEP in one board and has come here and said, well, we don't do that here. What do you mean you don't do that here? And so the child is having all kinds of difficulty because the IEP is not in place, and so there's nothing that any teacher is supposed to be following, and then therefore they're having, you know, they're having difficulty.
And appreciate what's here. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
I also wanted to go to, I guess, it's not clarified, but I do remember that regardless of an IEP placement, when the needs are identified, they must be met. That's like a standard, like, so it's not, IEP is not the measure of what needs to be met. It has to be met when there is, like, that should be the purview of all our, you know, educating staff, but that's just the understanding that I have. So when I look at it from that perspective, I'm very, like, it's a big deal to me because it's something where, again, what Andrew brought up before, not having the bias and that sense of using, so for example, so as having a need or having a neurodiversity doesn't lessen, like, it shouldn't define your supports at the educational level. That's just my thought.
I would like to also just add on, I think it's really important that the messaging from the school board, starting top down, to all of the people working with our children, should be that there isn't anything stigmatizing about disability. Because a lot of families might come in thinking that, especially if they haven't grown up with that diagnosis, and it can limit them from accessing support for their child. And if you come in and you have the educated people who are aware of child development, who make it non-stigmatizing, you have families that create stronger partnerships with you, you can then educate families about how to support their kids instead of having families who say don't want to use picture symbols at home because they think it's stigmatizing, and then they're limiting their child's ability to acquire communication and language, right? So I think that's an attitude that needs to maybe be challenged.
I'm just gonna add one more thing to this. Because I'm hearing that if parents being told in kindergarten that we don't do that here, and I'm like, the regulation 181 is pretty clear. If a parent requests an IPRC, they need to request it in writing. If they request one in writing, within 15 days, they're supposed to be given notice of sort of a date time. So there's supposed to be a response. So there's no mention in here of kindergarten or grade 1 or anything else. There's no stipulation. So anytime the legislation and policy conflict, legislation takes precedence, right? So it's not really an option. If parents requested it in writing, then the parent should be receiving it.
Like, if there's another reason, I don't, like, I'm uncertain, I really am, because I'm like, is it a financial consideration with the cost of the meetings? Is there something else? Because you don't grow out of those diagnoses, right? Like, the exceptionalities that are put out by the province, like, they aren't something you just all of a sudden you're not autistic, or all of a sudden you don't have an intellectual disability, right? Like, they're there forever. So what's the point of putting off having it formalized to have the supports in place for the kids? And even though the official legislation is that it needs to be done in writing, it's concerning to me when people in authority kind of gatekeep information from families. And if you verbally say to your principal, hey, I've heard of an IPRC, I think I need that, they're like, no, we don't do that. And they're like, they didn't put it in writing, so I don't actually have to do anything about it now. I don't understand the point of that. I don't understand why you would do that, because then you make families think it's not important, and especially if families don't have English as first language, or might have issues advocating themselves for their child because they might have their own intellectual disabilities, their own mental health issues, etc. It's concerning that there's this gate being put in front of them that's going to shut them down, and they don't realize, oh, I should have put it in writing. So I think it should be, like, this information should just be really easy to access. If your kid comes in with a disability, you should be given an IPRC package, and that should just be how it happens.
Yeah, and I guess the chair as well, that's up. I also just want to ensure, and I guess also say, as a principal within the system, as a system lead principal as well, I don't think there is any ill intent, which may be perceived at this point, and getting that kind of perception of that there is ill intent behind things. I don't think there's anything there. I think we have a lot of dedicated staff who care a whole heck of a lot for kids and for families, and a lot of different spaces and places, and are doing some pretty incredible, pretty passionate work as well. So I think that if we are, and if you were hearing through your association as well, that if there are concerns that are being brought that way, please definitely direct families to give us a call. We are happy to be able to take those calls. But I also just want to, and again, it may not have been how you were trying to intend it to come across, but I also just want to be able to say that I think that on behalf of all the DDSB staff, there isn't intent to be misdirected, to be intending to do anything that will be underhanded in any way. So I just want to be very, very, again, there are products to be able to work through, and there are people to be able to contact, to be able to help problem solve around that as well.
They say, like, when we do our kindergarten, like, welcome to kindergarten, that's kind of the early beginnings evenings. We have, and it's brought to the board, a special slide that will talk about if you have any concerns about your child, if there's identification, because that opens up our conversation, which what I would be using at my school is like, there's a process that we will follow. I connect them right away with our CERT. And that seems to me like a common practice that we all follow. It comes out, and again, it's, what part of that story I'd like to have spoken to that family, because soon, like, we have many families that will come with diagnosis as they're either a year 1 student or a year 2. And we're very like, okay, thank you. Now this is what we are going to do. Usually there's so many things that you would outline in one of those plans is already happening, definitely in my school. But this is what it looks like for the formality. But I know there is a slide when we do that presentation, so they're coming out there in the next few weeks is when we have all of them in schools. If you have any concerns with your child with a diagnosis, this is who you're connecting with.
100%,
yeah.
and I think people are connecting, and I think this is what they're being told when they're requesting an IPRC,
Okay, so I would say that's.
And it's multiple people, this
Okay.
isn't 1 or 2 people, this is lots of people, and it's like very similar messaging, so it sounds like a top-down thing where somebody's boss has said, we don't do this in kindergarten, and people heard this at a meeting, and they're going and saying, no, okay staff, okay certs, we don't do this in kindergarten, and it's being spread that way.
Through your chair, as a system, we continue to break down those barriers of ableism that are within our system, and we acknowledge that. I know that from Connor and ourselves, we do have conversations with our administrative colleagues around what the processes are. The IPRC guide is definitely on our website, and also in terms of our communication, we have what's called a CERT e-bulletin that actually goes out to all CERTs, or in high school what are considered a curriculum leads for special education. And I know myself, as overseeing that, we really do talk about the IPRC process, parents' rights and guardians' rights within that process, where to find the pieces of information. So thank you for highlighting that. We can definitely continue to bring that around as ongoing. As part of that CERT e-bulletin, that also goes out in terms of our operational comms every week, which is also linked. So the CERT e-bulletin is linked for all administrators within our system. And I know that when we have done professional development with our administrator colleagues this year, as well as with our CERT colleagues in curriculum lead and special education, we have also reiterated that. So if that is a message that is going out, that is a messaging that we can definitely address. I would be very interested, I know Connor would be interested as well, on those one-off situations. If you're seeing, or you're seeing from your members some consistency, then that's where we can actually come in and assist the family as well.
Okay. Is anything else? Anybody else have any community concerns? Okay, celebrations and successes. I'm going to start off by thanking Michelle Crawford-Ede for her time with us. Her 5 years of comment with, as a system lead is coming to an end. So she will be with us, after this meeting. So thank you for your dedication and your time, and sorry to keep you really late on your last meeting. Any other celebrations and successes quickly, given the time?
I have one
Yeah.
story, very much in keeping with our Inclusive Skills Ontario thing. So Adam decided that he was hungry and I was busy, so that he went and got his own peanut butter sandwich and using a knife, cut it in half on his own. You know how now.
That's awesome.
We have been trying to get him to use a knife to cut things. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Good for him.
I also have an Adam story.
Yeah.
Yay!
So, my son and his guide dog Murdoch just had their guide dog graduation yesterday. So they officially graduated as a guide dog and handler together. They've been together for a year. And Murdoch got to meet his sister, who also graduated at the same time, so his sister was there, and his puppy raisers, who raised him from 6 weeks old until about a year. So it was a nice reunion.
What a beautiful day.
That
It
is
was a
beautiful.
beautiful day.
Oh,
Just dogs all over.
Amazing. Our next SEAC meeting is June 5th, right here. Motion to adjourn. Tara, second, Kirsten, the president, all in favor? Excellent, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
So you can be.